great pleasure to welcome to our 2022 Online Trend Summit author and writer, Gurdeep. Gurd joins us today to talk about his new book, Mother Tongue, Flavours of a Second Generation. We're also going to be talking about the journey of the platform Mother Tongue and how it shaped his views on authenticity, as well as ethnicity, cultural appropriation, and much, much more. Thanks for joining us today, Gurd. It's a great pleasure to welcome you to our virtual stage.
Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
Just a note to participants, if you're joining the summit today as a Trend Hub subscriber, you can discover more about the topics covered in this discussion and much, much more in the 23-24 food and drink trends, cuisines, ingredients, frameworks on Trend Hub. Tell us a little bit about you, your background, and what influences you, if I may.
Yeah, I am a second generation British Indian food writer. I'm also a trend consultant, and I've worked in food for 20 years now. Started my career at Innocent Drinks, which was a sort of new startup kind of company. It was almost one of the first startups in food and drink in many ways. I was in the marketing team there for about 8 years. And then I spent a year traveling the world to eat my way around all the places I was just fascinated by. And then came back to London. I was then head of marketing for food, restaurants and wine at Harrods. And was one of the people behind, I suppose they did a kind of big transformation of the food world, which is called the Taste Revolution. And I was, I guess, one of the people behind that on the inside, which was very fun. And then my last full-time role was I was head of food trends as part of the development team at M&S. From a food perspective, I guess I'm really interested in the cultures of food in general and everything that is around food. I'm especially interested in diasporas and how diasporas travel and what happens to food when people travel around the world. I find that deeply fascinating, deeply interesting. I'm really interested in the intersection of food and identity. But I'm also very interested in things around sort of the intersection of food with things like art, with literature, with music in particular. I mean, the one thing I suppose that is an influence for me, almost more than food, arguably, is music. I am a classically trained cellist, and that very much infiltrates a lot of kind of the way that I think, I think musically. And actually people will sort of realize that when they see the book. My book has quite a musical thread through it. But just, I suppose, art, design, culture, fashion in a big way. I'm very interested in queer culture and literature. I mean, kind of lots of things. I'm a bit of a sort of magpie, if I'm honest. But food, everything generally has kind of a sort of leading back to food in some way.
And that, as you say, that intersection of where they all, that meeting point, that Venn diagram, if you like, the little bit in the middle where it all gets super interesting. I mean, I suppose that leads us really nicely on to Mother Tongue TV. Can you tell us a little bit about that? What was the point of that? What was it trying to do?
So Mother Tongue TV is an online platform that celebrates food stories of migration, race, identity, intergenerational conversations. And it kind of started as this sort of thing where I just wanted to create a platform and a space for people to talk about all the things that I found interesting in an unedited way. And actually, it's very much a space for people to have their say on their terms from their perspective.
Why do you think that these types of conversations and these nuances, the really interesting bits, were being edited out?
I think there's a few things. I think sometimes it doesn't drive the editorial agenda that those mainstream publications have. So sometimes they might be trying to drive a conversation that, you know, Indian food is like this, and all Black chefs are like this, and all Chinese cuisine is like this. And actually, if someone said something that didn't fit their narrative, it just wouldn't get in. The other thing is, I think that some journalists are frightened. They're scared to ask those conversations because they don't want to appear ignorant themselves. But in the process, they end up not asking the questions that they should ask. So I think there's an interesting thing. But also, I think, you know, we're still at relatively early stages with these conversations being had in the mainstream. And actually, we don't have a language around a lot of this stuff yet. And one of the things I wanted to do with Mother Tongue was, by offering people a platform where they could talk about it from their perspective, is actually give people that language to use. phrases like talking about diaspora, talking about third culture cuisine, talking about whatever it might be, talking about race very openly,
Yeah.
wanted to create a space where if people were feeling nervous about having those conversations or writing about those conversations, actually Mother Tongue became a space where they could read about it from the perspective of diaspora and go, oh, actually, that's potentially how I phrase that, or that's how I can talk about this in a way that I'm not going to appear ignorant, or actually is a sort of entryway for me to go into it. So I think there's a few things, but they all sort of interplay. But I do think it's changing quite rapidly, which is exciting.
I think it's so interesting that you say that, because that's one of the things that I've taken from reading content on the platform, is it's helped educate me, and we'll talk a little bit about it later on. But if there are people in the summit audience that are listening today that might empathize with that conversation that we just had,
absolutely,
go to Mother Tongue TV and read and listen, because it helps you, and it brings that, it normalizes the lexicon and helps people have those conversations. I think. Well, also really wanted to talk to you about your book, Mother Tongue Flavors of a Second Generation, and the interplay between the book and the platform. Tell us a bit more about the book and the project.
The book has been 2 years of my life sort of coming towards an end. It's one of those things I get quite emotional now suddenly talking about. The book, I suppose, it's my celebration of British Indian identity through food from my perspective. I think what it does is it captures a lot of the conversations that are had on the Mother Tongue platform, but it's my personal take on it. So it's, I suppose, the first time and the only place really that I'm giving you my view, apart from the fact that we're having these conversations today. But that's pretty much what it is. But it's whereas the platform is much more sort of interview based, Mother Tongue is a cookbook. It is very much a cookbook. But I suppose it's a cookbook where the interplay of identity and race and intergenerational sort of conversations are sort of at the forefront, and very much the kind of the sort of halo that is around the whole cookbook in a way. The book is in some ways an invitation to all people of diaspora to say our stories are as relevant, as important, and as different as every other story being told out there. And you should never feel that, oh, no one's going to be interested in my story as a whatever diaspora I am. I disagree. Our stories are in some ways even more interesting, even more intertwined with so many more themes and things. And I think often people go, well, I'm not a trained chef, I'm not white, I don't have these connections, I'm not middle class. I'm none of those things. And I'm very actively saying, this is my story, and I think it's relevant, and I think everyone's stories are relevant of all diaspora. How
does it make you feel when you're asked the question, and I'm assuming you've been asked it many times, where are you from? Or I guess some people will either go, when they hear your response, where are you really from? What's your response, and how does that make you feel?
My first response is always Leicester. I am from Leicester. I was born in Leicester. I am from Leicester. I lived in Leicester up until the age of 18. I go back to Leicester about every 3 weeks. Like, I am Leicester born and bred. I'm very, very proud of that, and that comes across in the book. If I'm pressed, I will answer depending on what I think the intention of the question is. If I feel like the intention of the asker is genuine curiosity in why my skin is brown, why my eyes are a certain shape, why I am talking about certain things, and it's genuine interest, then I will say, you know what, I'm British Indian, I'm Punjabi, my mum was born in India, my dad was born in Kenya, but this is my upbringing, this is it. And I'm extremely, forthcoming with it. If I feel like the intention of the asker is so that they can sort of codify some preconception they have about me, that they if I feel like it's something that someone needs to put me in a box for their own sake, because it makes them more comfortable with me as a person, then I go in circles and I weave that person into a knot of their own doing, and then I walk away. and I say all sorts of things, and I change it every time depending on what I feel like the intention is.
If you have that genuine curiosity, how do you ask that question?
My question would be, I think something like, what's your family heritage is a really interesting question.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think you can be really explicit about it. You can say, I'd love to learn more about how your ethnicity or how your culture has shaped who you are as a person. I think there's a difference between saying, I want you to tell me that you're Indian so that I can confirm that you're Indian.
Yes.
And because that's not about me, that's about you confirming what you need to know in your own head. Yeah. Whereas if your question is something like, how has your Indian upbringing shaped who you are today? That's about me, and that's genuinely showing you have an interest in me as a person, not showing that you need to consolidate something in your head so that you can make sense of who you think I am.
I want to talk a little bit about the word, your thoughts on the word ethnicity in the context of food, and I'd love, if you can, to give us a couple of examples from your book to illustrate that.
Ethnicity is an interesting word, and again, I think it's a word that has historically been used as a weapon. It's really about othering. The word ethnic is used most often as something that others one group from another. So you say, well, you are this ethnic group, which in the process means you are not this ethnic group. And I think when it's used in that way, it's very troubling. There are all sorts of examples. I won't really go into them, but there was a sort of food festival I know that had used the sort of word ethnic in the way that it was sort of talking about food, but it was very much presenting itself as sort of, here are all these other cultures that are not white. Isn't that interesting? And I think when you suddenly get that, it's sort of this sort of pantomime showcase of ethnicity, and it's basically racist is what it is. There are other uses of the word though as well, and I think you can talk about ethnicity in a much more respectful way. You can talk about cultural heritage, you can talk about color, you can talk about all of these things where you're genuinely being inquisitive and actually asking or genuinely showing your respect towards the sort of the history of something or the cultural influences on something. And in that context, I think it is a word that can be used if it's used respectfully. I think for me, what's almost worse is when it goes the other way, is that when people don't ask anything, or they sort of use this sense of, oh, well, I'm colorblind. It's like, well, why are you colorblind? Because you shouldn't be. Like, I am Indian, this person is black, this person is Chinese. You should be asking about these things, because otherwise you're sort of using your white privilege to kind of go, well, we all have the same privilege. Well, no, we don't, actually. Certain groups have more privilege than others. So actually, I do find not asking about it worse than asking about it in a way that may come across wrong. I'm not hugely uncomfortable with it unless it gets used from a sort of, someone asking my ethnicity. I'm not offended by that. I would say, well, I'm British Indian. If it's used as a sort of weaponizing thing, then I would be very immediately, it would arch my back. But again, I think it's about the intention of the asker.
Yeah. What about the word authenticity in the context of food? What does authenticity mean?
Oh, I mean, authenticity is a huge discussion on the platform, and it's quite a big discussion in my book. And I think, contrary to what people will think, I think it's a very, very important word. However, I question what it means and what it is. So authenticity is often used as a word to sort of denote a cuisine, in my case, Indian cuisine, Punjabi cuisine specifically. And it's often used to sort of denote what is perceived to be a sort of static cuisine that is in a village in India that has never changed, that has never moved, that is frozen in time, and is the sort of inception of authentic, and anything that is a deviation from that is therefore authentic. I disagree with that. I don't think that is a definition of authentic, mainly because I think it is doing a disservice to that cuisine in assuming that it is frozen in time, because it's not. Like cuisine, food is an evolving form of culture, and therefore my view is that authenticity absolutely matters, yes, but authenticity is not a frozen cuisine. Authenticity is actually a series of culinary snapshots that happen through time, and therefore there is no one authentic Indian cuisine. There is no one authentic Chinese cuisine. There is no one authentic way of cooking in a black way. That doesn't exist.
Yeah.
There are millions, billions of ways of doing it. If you're true to yourself, you're true to your story, you're true to your heritage and history, that is authenticity. So one of the things I explore a lot, and really the book is very much exploring this idea of third culture cooking, and me being this sort of child of diaspora, sort of in this sort of in-between space between Britishness and Indianness.
Yeah.
I talk a lot about how I don't call my cuisine authentically British. I don't call it authentically Indian. I call it authentically third culture.
Yeah, okay.
Because it's true to me.
And can you give us any examples from the book that would illustrate that?
I can give you loads. I mean, I think when people see the book, I mean, I do all sorts of things playing with dals and curries. So I have my takes on things. So I do a very classic yellow dal, which is done very much using my mom's sort of approach to playing with dals. And then the sort of tadka I put on top of it is studded with chorizo. So that's my dal has chorizo through it. My mom's doesn't, but mine does. My samosas, for example, I adore samosas as this kind of emblem of Indianness, which is interesting because actually they're not Indian. They traveled to India. I find that really interesting. My samosas are filled with harissa paneer and pistachios. So I'm kind of playing with Middle Eastern flavors, bringing pistachios. I've got fennel seeds through them. So, I mean, one of the recipes that seems to be getting a lot of attention when people look at it is my fried chicken sandwich, which is a miso masala fried chicken sandwich with a paprika Mary Rose. So there are flavors of Japan. There are sort of some very Indian-y flavors because it has a garam masala through it. There's a very paprika Mary Rose. I use a Japanese milk bread, and there's a lot of kind of playing with authenticity, but it's authentic to me.
It's authentic to you. Yeah, that sounds absolutely incredible, by the way.
A fried chicken sandwich, it is pretty good. That's a good, I have to say. Some of them I'm very proud of, and the fried chicken sandwich I really am.
That sounds fantastic. And another question that you often ask is about sharing your thoughts on cultural appropriation in the world of food. And can anyone ever own a particular cuisine? And again, I'd love an example. What are your thoughts on that?
Again, I know it's something I explore quite a lot in the book. My view on it, and again, this is not everyone who is British Indian's view, this is my view on it, is that cuisine is constantly evolving, and no one can have ownership of a cuisine or a ingredient. However, people have very deep emotional and cultural connections to them, and they need to be respected. So it's not about ownership to me, it's about respect for cultural, historical, and emotional connections to ingredients, to dishes that people have. For me, the reason I think it's such a sort of pertinent question is because cultural appropriation is ultimately about power and identity.
Yeah.
And someone who is in a position of power taking ownership of someone else's identity is ultimately what cultural appropriation is.
Yeah.
I kind of want to break that down a little bit. So talking about identity, I mean, identity has many facets to it. It is the color of your skin, it is the language that you speak, it's the place your parents are from, it's the clothes that you wear, it's the words that you use, it's your rites of passage, the way that you get married, the way that you do funerals. And all of these things are, very important parts of someone's identity. But of all of those, the food that you eat is the most intimate, because it is the thing that you ingest, it's the thing that becomes a part of you, and also it's the thing that when you share with someone becomes a part of them because they ingest it. They don't ingest the language, they don't ingest the clothes, but they do if you give them the food. And this is why it is a very intimate part of identity. When you then have someone in a position of power, and I want to be really clear about this, my view is that cultural appropriation is not about white people taking things from people of color. Absolutely not. It's about someone using any form of power that they might have. And you can have power over someone in all sorts of ways. It could be because of the color of your skin, it could be because you're wealthy, because you're perceive yourself to be better educated,
Yeah.
because you're a different caste to someone, because you're a different sexuality to someone, because you're a different shade of a color to someone.
Yeah.
You know, someone within a culture can absolutely appropriate their own culture. It is about using whatever power you have, and often it ends up being the color of your skin or the wealth or your education, and using that to undermine or to sort of take advantage of someone who you perceive to be below yourself for whatever facet of your identity you've used to kind of have that power in.
Yeah.
This is why it's so personal, I think, because cultural appropriation doesn't just happen with someone white taking a person of color's cult food. It's not about that. It's about someone who has any form of power taking an incredibly intimate part of someone's identity and either claiming it as their own or presenting it in a way that is not respectful to where it comes from, or undermining it in some way. And I think this is the interplay I think people really need to think about when they think about cultural appropriation. One is the food that I am presenting or talking about or posting, whatever. Who are the people that are deeply emotionally connected to this, and why is that? You know, is it because this is a real taste of the land in that part of the world, or actually this is food that they, as a culture, eat at their weddings, or they eat it when they're born, or actually it's a celebration dish and therefore it's deeply attached to their emotional celebrations, or is it something that's just an integral part to that culture? And therefore, what position of power do I have over that culture, and what am I doing? Now, I don't believe that people can have ownership of things. I think everyone should be able to get and can cook everything. But I think you need to be aware of what position of power you hold with all facets of yourself, whether it's your wealth, the color of your skin, your education, and how is that then being perceived by the culture that you are taking, whatever you're taking from. And it's the interplay of that is where cultural appropriation comes in.
Has going through, I guess, the journey over the last 2 years with Mother Tongue, question how you feel about your own background and culture, and has it challenged any of your own views at all?
I think that I have realized how tiny a part of Indianness I am aware of, because India is this incredible country of 1.3 or 4 billion people, and is similarly a global diaspora. Indian people are a global diaspora spread across the entire world, and are also a diaspora who are shaped in many ways by legacies of colonialism. And I think what I've realized is that my British Indian experience as a Punjabi second generation immigrant is one story in 1.3 billion. And I think the enormity of that is something that only hit me when I started doing the platform, and just realizing that, you know, even what I know about my own Indianness is minuscule compared to what Indianness is, but also that it is ever changing, ever evolving, and that is the joy of it, and that is the joy of all cultures. And I think that kind of the history and the dynamic aspects of it are sort of the interplay of that is now what just really excites me. And in some ways, I feel like the platform opened my world to something that I sort of knew was there, but then is just there in much more sort of a multi-layered, multifaceted way than I'd ever realized myself.
I can imagine how it almost blew that apart, and just
it's mind-blowing.
It's sort of discovering the bounds of the universe almost. It's I can imagine that. I just want to go back to the discussion we were having a couple of moments ago, and I suppose asking what your advice would be to industry when wanting to develop food brands and products, but in a way that is sympathetic and mindful to different ethnicities, cultural appropriation, race, and those types of things. Because I think one of the things that's come through, I mean, through into connecting with the platform, but also this conversation, is it's desperately complex as well. And whether you got any kind of words of advice or guardrails or anything like that that you could share for food brands and so on.
My first piece of advice would be to not not be fearful, and to go into it with a genuine intention, because if your intention is genuine, it is okay if you slip up along the way.
Yeah,
That will be my first thing is, why are you doing this? Why is this a cuisine that you want to turn into products? Why is this a story that you feel like you want to tell? Why are these flavors that you want to play with? Absolutely do play with them. I strongly believe that flavors are there to be played with. There's a big message in the book. But what I would say is then just do your homework. Firstly, realize what position of power you are in. Are you a big FMCG brand? Are you a startup brand that has some investor sort of money behind you? Are you a sort of street food truck? Like, what are you? And actually, what privileges do you hold as an entity, not just as an individual person, but as an entity, versus the culture that you're looking to sort of engage with? And then engage. Ask people from that culture. Get advice. Enjoy learning about it. And then when it actually is presented, the question is, do I feel like I'm being sympathetic to this, or actually do I feel like I'm using my advantage in this interplay between myself as an entity and this culture to profit from this? It's okay to profit from it if you're then giving back or you're being sympathetic to it. But if you genuinely don't feel like you are, then I would really question your motives. So I actually don't think it's any more difficult than that. I think if your motives are genuine and you're engaging and you're sharing the story respectfully or offering back to the communities you're borrowing from, go for it. Absolutely. I want to taste all of these incredible products. But if they're done sympathetically and respectfully.
That's brilliant. I think it will be a question, in the minds, on the lips of the people watching today. And I think to bring it back to that kind of really simple framework, I think will help, because as you say, the interplay between different cultures and flavors and ingredients. We want, in the products that are out in restaurant menus and on supermarket shelves, you want people to enjoy them, but in a way that is sympathetic.
And it doesn't mean you can't play with flavors and you can't do remixes and you can't do chicken tikka nachos. My God, delicious. I want chicken tikka nachos. You absolutely can, but sort of look into what it is that you're putting out there, what's the history behind it, and also engage, get people from that diaspora involved. Use them as your focus groups, ask them what they think, and don't assume that those culinary cultures are static, because they're not. They're all ever evolving, and they are all as dynamic as you sort of think they could be. But I would say get into the granular detail. If you're doing a sort of an Indian burrito, great, delicious. But Indianness is all sorts of things. And the Indianness of South India is completely different to the north of the cuisine of North India, which is different to Bengal, which is different to Mumbai and Maharashtra. So what Indianness are you putting across there? Be granular. Say this is a Bengali influence. Or this is South Indian influence and we're using curry leaves and mustard seeds. Get granular. I think we're also in this sort of world where people are beyond those generic catch-all things. If I was to do a British pizza, someone would be like, well, what's a British pizza? What does that mean? Whereas if I said, you know what, I'm doing a pizza that's celebrating the West Country and I've used this sort of apple cider chutney on it and I've got this kind of cheddar on it and I'm using this flour from this place, that's suddenly interesting.
That's brilliant. That really helps. I think bringing it back to brass tacks, it helps me. It will absolutely help the audience. How do you hope then that the narratives that you illustrate by Mother Tongue help to feed the appreciation of culture and culinary identity into the future then?
I think that what I really want it to do is to cement it as a conversation that will never, ever end or close. What I want people to do is to realize this is a constantly evolving conversation. And you know what? That means your product strategy will also be constantly evolving. And the language changes and the language shifts. And that might mean, you know what, in 2 years' time, something that you've put in your packaging now, you might change the wording on in 2 years, and that's okay. In some ways, for me, this should be thought of as a fresh ingredient.
Yes. Yeah.
And the quality that you checks that you would put behind a fresh ingredient, you should be putting behind where you are with this conversation, because it moves and it will constantly move.
An unscripted question. Your two, and you've talked about your fried chicken, which I can't wait to try. A couple of other recipes from the book that are just absolute, favorites, must try this.
There are so many, which is so arrogant to say. There is, I suppose there's sort of an underlying theme of some very British classics kind of reinterpreted through a third culture lens. I do a roast chicken, which is a curry leaf, lemongrass, and Aleppo pepper roast chicken, which is sort of twice marinated. So I kind of do this thing where I lemon brine it first, which is a very sort of tandoori chicken thing to do. So you kind of get this lemony, salty brine, which I infuse with things like amchur and I think cardamom in the recipe from what I remember. And then there is this very fragrant kind of masala paste on it. And that is a delicious recipe. I have my take on a custard tart, which is very rich. I only use egg yolks and save the egg whites for meringues. And then there's kind of a biscuity crust, but mine has saffron through it. It has candied fennel seeds and black pepper roasted strawberries, which is a dish I can't make too often because I can't have it in the house because I eat the whole thing. There is my take on lasagna rolls, which kind of uses a kasundi keema. Kasundi is a kind of Bengali tomato sauce that's made with kind of lots of mustard seeds, lots of sort of coriander seeds and cumin. So there's a kind of kasundi keema lasagna rolls.
That sounds incredible.
There's all sorts. I mean, the other thing that's interesting in the book is there is a huge celebration of British curry houses, which I grew up going to. And I think one of the things that I've always found quite interesting is that curry houses have been often sort of given a kind of bad rep and sort of debunked in this country. And I did the opposite. I grew up going to curry houses, and I do one of the recipes, which is one of my favorite recipes, is I do my take on a chicken tikka masala, because I grew up eating tikka masala. I went to curry houses all the time. They were run by my parents' friends, and so we would go to them all the time. And in the same way that when you go to a restaurant, you try and recreate it at home. I mean, tikka masala was nothing like what we ate at home, and yet we would go to Indian restaurants, eat tikka masala, and come home and be like, we want to make tikka masala, like this dish that's nothing like the Punjabi food we eat. So I grew up eating it. So there's this whole kind of conversation around kind of curry houses, which brings in the whole question around authenticity and things like that. So yeah, there's a lot. There's a lot.
Absolutely. Wow. I pre-ordered my copy. When can when can we get our hands on?
You can get our hands on it. It comes out very early next year. So very, very start of March next year. We're just finishing it off right now. We've signed off the cover. We've got the very final bits just kind of happening. And I think by the time this has aired, the cover will have been revealed. So look out for that. But very soon. Yes, it's a long time, but yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you see, you've got the book coming out. You've won the Jane Grigson Trust Award for New Food Writers. Congratulations on that.
Thank you.
You're writing amazing content in some fantastic titles. What is next? So the book next year, but what's next? Yeah, absolutely, for you and for Mother Tongue.
I think, to be honest, for me, the thing I'm really focused on is writing at the moment. I'm really enjoying that. So I have a monthly column in Olive, which is about to be expanded, which I'm really excited about. So look out for that. It's kind of so far to date, I've kind of focused on interesting ingredients, but I'm kind of expanding that to be much more about things that I find exciting in the food world. So really exciting to be doing that. And I'm on the Olive podcast quite regularly, so have a look out for that. I'm doing quite a bit of travel writing. I love, travel is a big sort of inspiration and influence on my own eating, and I'm very curious about the world. So I'm doing a lot more travel writing, and actually I'm sort of dipping my toe into kind of lifestyle interiors writing as well. So writing is kind of my thing at the moment, but who knows? I'm going to kind of see where the book takes me, and kind of open to sort of all things that may or may not happen. But I'm kind of really enjoying the sort of being in sort of that writing world at the moment.
Well, it's desperately exciting. I can't wait for it to come out. It's got TV written all over it for me, but that's just my view. Gerd, a huge thank you from Team TFP and the 2022 Summit audience for sharing your expertise, your knowledge on this really fascinating, pertinent and thought-provoking topic. Thank you so much for joining us. It's a real pleasure to talk to you. Really interesting. Thank you.
Thanks so much.